January 1944. Southern Italy. The wind that came down from the Apennine Mountains carried a sharpness that felt almost surgical, cold enough to slice through wool coats, boots, even the thick canvas of army tents. Snow had fallen overnight, though most of it turned to mud as soon as it mixed with the churned battlefield soil. The front near the small town of San Vittore was a chaos of artillery craters, broken olive trees, abandoned helmets, and silent corpses half buried in slush. The war in Italy was nothing like the men had imagined. It wasn't glorious. It wasn't fast. It wasn't even moving. Everything, every hill, every ridge, every stone farmhouse had become a fortress. The German Gustav Line was doing exactly what General Kesselring promised, choking the Allied advance inch by inch. Inside a Red Cross forward aid station, a low, sandbagged structure that smelled of iodine, smoke, diesel, and human fear, 29-year-old Helena Kruger tightened the bandage around a soldier's arm as artillery thundered somewhere on the ridge. Her hands did not tremble. Her voice did not rise. Her breath remained slow and controlled. She had been working for 17 hours without rest, but exhaustion was something she learned to ignore long ago. Every minute she stopped, someone else might die. Helena stood out immediately among the nurses. She was tall, slender, with ash blonde hair tied into a neat bun, a pale face smudged with dirt and tiredness, and eyes the color of a winter river. Around her neck was the only personal item she still owned, a long white silk scarf. Her mother had given it to her before the war back in Austria, before she escaped Italy and eventually joined the Allied cause as a Red Cross volunteer. The scarf made her recognizable, almost iconic, to every soldier who passed through the aid station. Many said they could spot her even from a distance, moving between the wounded like a guiding light in a place where hope usually came to die. Outside, the moans of injured men mixed with the clanking of stretchers and the guttural coughs of exhausted corpsmen. Trucks came and went, bringing new waves of casualties from the front. The fighting at San Vittore had intensified. Machine guns chattered like typewriters of death. Mortars echoed like thunder rolling down a narrow valley. Every explosion sent dust raining from the canvas ceiling. "Next one!" yelled Lieutenant Turner, the head triage officer. His voice cracked from overusing it. He had shouted for 3 days straight. 2 infantrymen carried in a soldier whose leg had been shattered by shell fragments. Blood had soaked through the blanket wrapped around him. The wound smelled metallic and rotten. Gangrene would set in fast at these temperatures. Helena leaned over him, brushing mud from his cheek. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Look at me, not at your leg." The soldier blinked through tears. "Ma'am, are we losing?" Helena almost said yes. The Germans held every ridge. The Allies were taking hills only to lose them again. It felt endless, pointless, hopeless. But she smiled softly. "Not as long as you're looking at me." Something in her tone steadied him. Even the surgeon, Captain Rosenberg, glanced up briefly. He had seen nurses who fainted at the sight of blood, nurses who panicked under fire, nurses who ran when mortars landed too close. But Helena? She didn't flinch. Not once in the 6 months he worked with her. "Get the morphine," she said calmly. Then the next explosion hit. The ground shook violently. Several lamps swung from the rafters. Dust filled the air. Someone screamed outside. Turner swore. "That was too damn close." Helena didn't react. She leaned in closer to the wounded soldier, covering his head with her arm as plaster rained over them. "You're safe," she whispered, though she wasn't sure it was true. "I've got you." The shelling continued for 20 minutes. When it stopped, there was a strange, heavy silence, broken only by the distant rumble of tanks moving along the valley floor. San Vittore would fall within days, but the price in blood would be enormous, and Helena would feel every drop. By mid-January, the fighting had shifted toward Monte Cassino. The ancient Benedictine monastery atop the mountain loomed over the entire valley. Germans had turned the surrounding hills, Cairo, Belvedere, and Colomaiolo, into death traps. The Allies kept attacking, the Germans kept repelling. Snowstorms turned every slope into mud and misery. Forward aid stations were constantly overwhelmed. In one of them, a captured farmhouse reinforced with sandbags, Helena sat beside a young soldier whose lungs were filling with blood. She fed him small sips of water and wiped his forehead. "Do you have someone waiting for you back home?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he gasped. "My sister. She's 16, keeps writing me letters. Says I should bring her a gift from Italy." Helena smiled gently. "What kind of gift?" "A snow globe," he whispered. "She collects them." Helena reached into her pocket. She carried almost nothing personal, except a tiny Italian snow globe she bought from an old woman in Naples months earlier. A monastery inside, surrounded by swirling white flakes. She placed it into his shaking hand. "For her," she whispered. Tears filled his eyes. He wanted to thank her properly, but death overtook him before he could. Helena closed his eyes with 2 fingers and sat beside him for a long moment in complete silence. Outside, another truck screeched to a halt. More wounded. Always more wounded. Days blurred into nights. Nurses slept sitting upright. Surgeons operated until their hands shook. The stench of blood never left the air. The aid station was hit by artillery twice. Once, a mortar exploded so close that it blew open one side of the building. One nurse lost her arm. One medic lost his hearing. Yet Helena remained calm, almost unnervingly calm. The men began calling her the Angel of San Pietro. The name stuck. But the nickname didn't capture the truth. Helena wasn't an angel. She was a woman who had lost everything. Her country, her home, her family, her identity, and had chosen to rebuild herself among the dying. She understood pain better than anyone. But she also understood that even one kind word, even one moment of gentleness, could pull a man back from the edge. Her presence raised morale more effectively than speeches, pay bonuses, or promises of rotation. When Helena stepped into a tent full of wounded soldiers, men who moments earlier looked ready to give up would sit straighter, breathe deeper, focus harder. Commanders noticed, officers commented. The battalion chaplain once said, "If she walks into a foxhole, even God stands at attention." But she had limits, and she was about to reach them. The battle for Monte Cassino reached a new level of brutality in February 1944. Rain turned everything into mud. The Luftwaffe bombed the valley at night. During the day, Allied artillery hammered the slopes. Screams echoed through the mountains at all hours. On February 10th, during a retreat from Hill 593, Helena volunteered to help evacuate a group of wounded trapped behind a collapsed stone wall. She should not have gone. When the shell hit, it was pure luck she wasn't torn apart. The explosion sent her flying into a ditch. Her white scarf caught fire. Her ears rang with a deafening whine. But she forced herself up, stumbling through smoke and debris to pull out 2 soldiers whose legs were pinned under rubble. She dug with her bare hands until her nails cracked and bled. He dragged them to safety one at a time. She screamed for help until her voice gave out. By the end of the day, she could barely stand. Her commanding surgeon ordered her to rest. She refused. "You're no good to anyone if you collapse," he argued. But Helena shook her head. "They can collapse. I can't." She returned to work. Her fellow nurses looked at her with awe. But one of them, Clara Bennett, saw something different behind Helena's calm face. "You're not sleeping," Clara whispered one night as they wrapped bandages in a cold storage room. "Your hands are shaking. You haven't eaten in days. If you keep this up, you'll die out there." Helena tied another knot. Her voice was flat. "I don't have the right to be tired." "Of course you do." "No," Helena said, meeting Clara's eyes for the first time. "Because I am not fighting for a country. I am fighting for forgiveness." Clara didn't understand. No one did, not yet. The biggest day of Helena's life came in March 1944, during the first battle for Cassino. The New Zealanders and Indians launched an assault toward the town. Germans were dug in everywhere: machine gun nests, snipers, mines, artillery observers. Casualties flooded the aid station so fast that cots ran out. Men lay on the floor, on crates, against walls, wrapped in blankets soaked in their own blood. At dusk, a radio operator stumbled in, shouting, "Convoy hit, North Road, ambulance overturned, 2 nurses trapped." Without hesitation, Helena grabbed her medical satchel and ran outside. Snow crunched under her boots. The sky was fading to black, lit only by artillery flashes on the mountainside. German mortars thumped in the distance. The wreckage was half a mile away, too far, too exposed, too dangerous, but she sprinted anyway. When she reached the overturned ambulance, she dropped to her knees. Shards of metal and glass were everywhere. A fire burned underneath, warming the air with oily smoke. Inside, 2 nurses were trapped, one conscious, one unconscious. Helena crawled in through the broken side door. Hot metal cut her hands. Smoke burned her throat. She could barely breathe. But she grabbed the first nurse, looped her arms under her shoulders, and pulled her out. Then the second. Her hands blistered. The heat scorched her skin. Her scarf caught fire again. She tore it off and threw it aside, but she saved them. Then she heard voices behind her. 3 German paratroopers, Fallschirmjäger, emerged from the shadows. They looked as surprised as she felt. One raised his rifle. Helena froze. A Red Cross badge usually protected medical staff. Usually, not tonight. A shot cracked, but it wasn't aimed at her. A squad of American infantrymen had arrived just in time, scattering the Germans with rifle fire. One soldier, Private Anthony Calloway, helped her up. "You're insane," he said breathlessly. "You should have been killed." "I had work to do," Helena whispered. He stared at her, shaking his head. "We'll never forget this." But she would forget everything that wasn't her duty, because her duty was all she had left. The war pressed on. Wounds deepened, morale dropped. Even officers felt despair. But one night in late March, during a rare moment of quiet, Helena found herself sitting outside the aid station, watching smoke rise from Cassino in the distance. The monastery glowed faintly under the moonlight, its ruins still smoldering from the Allied bombing weeks earlier. Sergeant Robert Hale, now on light duty after recovering from arm wounds, sat beside her. "You ever think about home?" he asked. "No," she replied honestly. "You don't miss it?" "My home doesn't exist anymore." He didn't press. He knew everyone on this front carried ghosts, but Helena's ghosts were heavier than most. Quietly, she reached for her scorched white scarf, now patched, stained, no longer white, and traced the burned edges. "My mother gave me this," she said softly. "She said it would always keep me warm. She didn't know I would need it in a war." "Where is she now?" Helena looked away. "I don't know," she whispered. "Last letter I received was from 1940. Austria was not safe for people who didn't agree with the new order." Hale exhaled. He understood. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a refugee, a survivor, a woman fighting a war she didn't start and didn't want, but for reasons deeper than any soldier around her could imagine. April came. The third battle for Cassino began, shelling day and night, smoke that never cleared, mud that swallowed boots, machine gun nests hidden in ruins, snipers picking off anyone who moved. Helena's aid station became hell on earth. In one 24-hour period, they received 142 wounded. Amputations, shrapnel extractions, burn victims, frostbite cases, men who had lost eyes, men who had lost hope, men who begged to die, men who wished they had. Helena worked beside surgeons who collapsed mid-operation. She held lights while Captain Rosenberg cut into a man's abdomen, using hands that shook violently from exhaustion. She whispered to soldiers who couldn't stop trembling. She cleaned blood until her uniform was soaked red, her white scarf turned crimson. Everyone noticed, everyone talked, but no one said it out loud. Helena was breaking. Slowly, quietly, but surely. On May 11th, 1944, the Allies launched Operation Diadem, the massive assault intended to finally break the Gustav Line. It was the most intense bombardment Helena had ever heard. Over 1,600 artillery pieces firing for hours. The ground trembled. The sky flashed white. The roar was constant, deafening, endless. Then the wounded came, dozens per hour, then dozens per minute. Chaos, complete unimaginable chaos. Helena moved from bed to bed like a ghost. Her movements mechanical, precise. Her voice barely audible. She didn't smile anymore. She didn't speak unless necessary. Her eyes looked hollow as though she were watching everything from far away. At one point, she stopped walking. She stared at a wounded soldier, but she wasn't seeing him. She was somewhere else, lost in memories, trauma, exhaustion, grief. Captain Rosenberg grabbed her shoulders. "Helena, stay with me." She blinked, then nodded, then kept working. But Rosenberg knew she was close to collapse. He just didn't know how close. On May 17th, the night before the final breakthrough at Cassino, Helena returned to triage to check on a group of Gurkha soldiers wounded in the final push up the ridge. As she bent down to adjust a splint, she heard a faint whistle, a mortar. Close, too close. The explosion threw her across the room. Lights went out, dust filled the air, screams, metal clattering. A beam collapsed. Someone tackled her, shielding her from falling debris. It was Private Calloway. When the dust settled, she felt warm liquid on her face, blood, but not hers. Calloway had taken most of the blast. He died minutes later. Helena sat beside him, holding his hand long after he stopped breathing. For the first time since the war began, she cried. Not dainty tears, not quiet ones, but deep, shaking sobs, the kind that come from a place far below the surface, a place where all the grief, guilt, and exhaustion live. She cried until her body gave out. And she collapsed. She woke 2 days later in a hospital tent in the Liri Valley. The Gustav line had finally broken. Monte Cassino had fallen. The road to Rome was open. The world outside was celebrating. But Helena couldn't move her hands. They were wrapped in thick white bandages, second-degree burns, severe bruising, and nerve damage. The doctors told her she couldn't return to frontline duty. Ever. She stared at them silently. "No," she whispered. "I need to go back." "You can't," the surgeon said gently. "You won't be able to hold instruments for months." "I don't need instruments," she said. "I need to be there." But orders were orders. She was to be evacuated to a rear hospital in Naples. When the ambulance came to pick her up, dozens of soldiers gathered around. Some saluted, some pressed small objects into her hands. Dog tags, notes, pins, unit patches. Some whispered thank you through tears. Sergeant Hale hugged her, something forbidden but ignored. "You saved more lives than any rifleman or any officer out there," he said. "I didn't save enough," she whispered. "You saved us." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry, not this time. She simply wrapped her burned hands around her scarf, now torn, stained, and almost unrecognizable, and nodded. As the ambulance drove away, soldiers watched quietly. Some said Helena was the bravest woman they ever met. Others said she was the strongest. But the truth was simpler. She never stopped fighting. She just fought a different kind of war. A war against despair, a war against fear, a war against death itself. And for thousands of men who survived Monte Cassino, she won.